Hi, I'm Neil.
And I'm John.
And you're listening to World of Telly, the podcast where John and I watch every single TV programme ever made in no particular order. And I don't know if you know this, John, but there's been some scepticism about whether we are actually going to do every TV programme ever made.
I've seen some of that unhealthy scepticism, and I think people should just take us at our word.
I think today's choice of programme is going to put those fears to bed, and it will definitely prove we are doing every single TV programme ever made. John, what are we doing today?
Don't Drink the Water.
What the hell is that?
It's the sequel to the long-running ITV sitcom On the Buses.
Of course it is. It always appears in everyone's top 10 list of British comedy, doesn't it?
It does. Mark Lewison's excellent Radio Times Guide to Comedy. It's got a small chart of the worst British sitcoms, and Don't Drink the Water is at number 6.
Oh, okay. What's number 1? Is it Yus, my dear?
It's not, it's Bottle Boys.
Oh, yeah.
Starring Robin Asquith. Yus, as we in the industry call it, is number 2.
I was close then.
You were very close.
Yeah, can I just shock you, John?
Yeah.
I quite enjoyed it. I don't know if it's Stockholm Syndrome, but I was expecting this to be horrific. And don't get me wrong, it is horrific to start with. But then it won me over. But anyway, we'll get into it. Can you explain how this programme came about?
In order to explain this, I think one of the things we have to, because you'll hear us using the phrase, the initials LWT, which stands for London Weekend Television. And I'm conscious of the fact that unless you're sort of our age, some people won't be familiar with the ITV regional structure of how things used to work.
I don't think it gets covered on TikTok very often.
It's not the trending topic or whatever they have on TikTok. It's not rising to the top of the algorithm. To us, when we were kids, it seemed like, the water we swam in, the air we breathed, the way that ITV worked. It can get very complicated, but the simplest way of describing it is that when ITV was introduced as a channel in 1955, it was, obviously a commercial alternative to the BBC, which up to then had a monopoly. But it was seen as being very important that, unlike the BBC, which was based in London, that it wasn't kind of dominated by London. So the country was split up into regions, and there was a different company, broadly speaking, who looked after the different areas. Now, this changed over time. Even the regions changed, so it gets more complicated. But effectively, you had, say, the North, and that was run by a company called Granada.
Yeah.
Who went on to make Coronation Street. You had the Midlands, which was looked after by ATV. And you also had, obviously, the London area, which was looked after by Rediffusion. Now, what complicates this somewhat is that sometimes the weekend was done by a different company.
Right.
So in the north, it was Granada and ABC. London was split. And confusingly, ATV used to do the Midlands for 5 days, the weekdays, and used to do London for the weekend. It becomes more complicated as time goes on, but for the purposes of this podcast, there was a lot of concern that ITV was dumbing things down and that the broadcasting was somehow suffering from this, even though these programmes were unbelievably popular, like Sunday Night at the London Palladium, comedy shows, all those kind of things like that. And there was something called the Pilkington Committee, which was brought together to look at broadcasting. That was in the sort of early 60s. And effectively, it had some quite weird people. I had Joyce Grenfell on it. It had Billy Wright, the footballer, who was married to one of the Beverly sisters. It was quite a kind of strange group in terms of the way it was made up. But basically, when the report came out from the Pilkington Committee on the Future of Broadcasting, it absolutely castigated ITV. It basically said it was, it was kind of like, it was vulgar, it was cheapening broadcasting. They agreed that the BBC should have BBC Two. That was one of the things that they did. And basically ITV, yeah, absolutely. ITV got a total slamming. And therefore, the ITA, who the Independent Television Authority, which sort of regulated the ITV channels, kind of put the ITV companies on a warning that when their franchises came up for renewal, their licenses to continue to broadcast, that they better come in with some more ideas of public service broadcasting.
Right.
What came into that was David Frost and a number of other people decided to bid for the weekend franchise in London. And they became LWT. And because of the fact that they had these incredibly highfalutin ideas of what they would put on, they'd put at the weekend, they'd put a Brecht play on, they'd put opera on. And at this time, in this political context, they were lapped up by the ITA as being, this is what we want. And they had some incredibly good names from broadcasting in there. The head of comedy was Frank Muir. They got Jimmy Hill as head of sport. They had Humphrey Barclay, I think it was, in comedy. They had various people to do with arts, all experienced broadcasters, all brought in, and the whole thing was a complete disaster. It was really tricky having the weekend franchise because of the fact that the BBC would bring in all of their big guns and focus it on at the weekend. But there was incredible politics going on because one of the reasons, for example, that Doctor Who did so well over the years was that the different regions couldn't get their act together to put the same programme on networked against Doctor Who until Buck Rogers in the 25th Century in whenever that was, 1980, wasn't it, basically. It was so catastrophic that it looked like London Weekend Television might actually lose the licence. And then at the end of that year, the guy who was in charge, Michael Peacock, got the sack by the board of LWT. And that took away, not Jimmy Hill, but most of the people who were in charge of programming, the heads of department, all left as a matter of principle alongside Michael Peacock. Weirdly, Rupert Murdoch came in at this point and became a major shareholder. Yeah, absolutely. Rupert Murdoch appeared and he wanted to take over LWT. Now, just to say, the one chink of light in all of this during the first year of LWT was that Frank Muir, in his characteristic way, commissioned some very popular sitcoms. Basically, he commissioned Doctor in the House, which, as we'll talk about, went on to have many, many episodes and many, many sort of spin-offs. He did Please Sir, and he also commissioned On the Buses, most importantly for this. He also commissioned Curry and Chips by Spike Milligan and Johnny Spate. We'll move on from that rapidly. So basically, all of this stuff was happening. LWT was in a terrible state, but then came along upstairs. Downstairs, things started to right themselves. But there was a guy who was director of programmes at LWT. He left at one point and came back again, called Cyril Bennett. And his approach to comedy was that if you had something that was a success, you just made as much of it as possible.
Right.
And you really hammered it into the ground. So Please Sir, these were 13 episode series. Okay, we want more of this. I'll have another 13. I'll have another 13. So you got Please Sir. It had a spin-off called The Fen Street Gang, which had yet another spin-off called Bowler. You had Doctor in the House, Doctor at Large, Doctor at Sea, all of this kind of stuff. And they really sort of hammered. And of course, On the Buses, there were 74 episodes in 4 years. When Barry Took, who later took over as head of comedy, Barry Took was asked by Rupert Murdoch, of all people. Rupert Murdoch said, well, why can't you have On the Buses on every week? Because it was such a success, he just couldn't see. It was like, why don't you just keep making it? And Barry Took had to point out that Reg Varney had already had 2 heart attacks by this point. And if you made any more, then you'll probably kill them off. And I think that what happened, I think, with Don't Drink the Water is because it's this thing about obsessing about having sequels to things. Because you've had a success like On the Buses. Towards the end of On the Buses, everybody was sick of it. Reg Varney left before the very end of it. Blakey became a main character and actually moved into the Reg Varney character's house with his mum. So to me, it was that On the Buses fell apart in the end. You know, no one wanted to do it anymore. It had really been flogged to death. But Cyril Bennett thought, well, okay, what are our options here? We've done millions of sequels, so let's do a sequel to On the Buses. And that's where Don't Drink the Water came from.
Oh, well, I'm not standing for that. Right, that's another one from me complaint for me list. Right.
Here, what list is that then?
This is a list of all the complaints of the builder. I'm seeing him when he gets back from Madrid.
Oh, yeah. Do you know what the builder's doing in Madrid?
No, what's that, mate?
5 years.
Prison?
Yeah.
Who for?
putting up this block of flats.
Now, if we're going to talk about On the Buses and Don't Drink the Water, we need to talk about the people who created it. The two Ronnies, or the other two Ronnies. Ronald Chesney and Ronald Wolfe. So what did they do before On the Buses, John?
They started off by doing, or pretty much started off by doing, a series on BBC called The Rag Trade, which was about a garment factory. And it had Peter Jones playing the boss. It had Miriam Carlin. It had Barbara Windsor, Sheila Hancock, and also Reg Varney was sort of playing one of the characters in there. And it's interesting to look at because The Rag Trade is actually not bad. It's quite a good series. They went on to do something called Meet the Wife, famously referenced in the Beatles song on Sgt. Pepper's Good Morning, which had Thora Hird in it. And then they did On the Buses. And I see that as being quite a dark parabola to end up with On the Buses, because we'll do On the Buses at some point. But
Of course we will.
On the Buses is a fairly despicable programme. It's relentlessly depressing, and the levels of misogyny in it are quite something. And indeed, the only character who they, of course, all the other main characters hate, Blakey, who's Stephen Lewis plays, the bus, is actually the only redeemable character in the whole programme. Because he tries to protect the female Clippies from the horrible advances of Reg Varney. One thing I remember is he introduces women drivers, and it's the other characters that conspire to drum them out of the bus depot so they can't drive anymore, and it was Blakey's initiative. So Blakey is basically the only kind of redeemable character in it.
And didn't Stephen Lewis write some of the episodes of On the Buses?
Yes, along with Bob Grant. They even wrote a comedy together. There was a pilot for it, which they tried to get off the ground as well. But Stephen Lewis had a big background as a writer. And they sort of took over On the Buses towards the end. But I think, they were all getting rather weary of it as it finally, 74 episodes in 4 years is...
And some feature films as well.
Well, yes. The On the Buses films were incredibly popular, though, of course, they're in a slightly different fictional universe.
Is this the On the Buses multiverse?
It is the On the Buses multiverse, because they have red double-decker buses in the films and green in the TV series, and it's a different bus company.
Oh, that must have sent the fans mental.
Absolutely. I mean, who knows? They might have even got to having Blakey slip from one universe to another.
And Stephen Lewis was a lot younger than he appeared as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, in Don't Drink the Water, both Pat Coombs and Stephen Lewis are roughly the same age. They're in the late 40s, but they're playing like 10 years older, aren't they, in the programme?
At least.
Yeah, at least. Stephen Lewis had a really, really interesting career because he started off as an actor with Joan Littlewood in the theatre in Stratford East. Famously, she did things like Taste of Honey, Things Ain't What They Used to Be. There was people like Harry H. Corbett there, and Lionel Bart worked with her as well, and it was very much a working class kind of thing. And Stephen Lewis came along to that, thought he'd chance his arm as an actor, and then he wrote a play called Sparrows Can't Sing, which had quite a bit of success, transferred to the West End, and they made a film of it as well.
Barbara Windsor was in that, wasn't she?
Barbara Windsor was in that, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and as I mentioned, she was in The Rag Trade as well. Mm-hmm. He wrote some armchair theatres. He, tried to get a number of things, going, and then he got the part as Blakey in On the Buses. And whether that's a step up or a step down, it's hard to say.
Who's going to employ a layabout like you? Oh, it's no other job going with a lot of money, for doing nothing.
Well, you got one.
Well, I may appear to be doing nothing to you, butler, but I'm here using my brains, mate.
Oh, are you? Yeah. What, doing what?
Thinking of ways and means of stopping you from getting overtime. Now get out, go on.
Why did I tell you? A waste of time, Jack.
Right, mate.
Is the Hitler moustache he has in On the Buses and Don't Drink the Water, is it his real moustache or is it fake?
I think it's fake because either he shaved it off after each series, because there's plenty of photos on. There's if you look at some of the kind of press cuttings from the time, there's sort of, you won't believe who this is. It's Blakey, and there's Stephen Lewis without a moustache, dressed normally. You're supposed to say, my God, I can't recognise him. It's a bit, like the idea of the librarian letting her hair down and taking her glasses off, and it's, my God, you're beautiful.
I mean, to commit to having a Hitler moustache would have been a hell of a thing, wouldn't it?
It seems unlikely to me, because I think you see a lot of kind of off, when he's not at work, shots of him in the press where he's not got it on. But it's hard to say. I mean, it's just a gag about the Inspector being like Hitler, isn't it? It seems to be that, it's out the longest running, not that good a gag that you could possibly. He has to commit to it for.
Well, there's a whole episode of Don't Drink the Water, which plays on this, but we'll get to that eventually. So what is the basic plot then? It's not just going on holiday, is it? They actually retire. Blakey and his sister, Dottie, they buy an apartment, don't they, in Spain, and go and retire, which seemed very forward-thinking for 1974.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that comes up a lot is that Blakey's got kind of good intentions, hasn't he? He's trying to be cosmopolitan.
This is what shocked me the most about watching it. I was expecting Blakey to be really reactionary and racist, but he throws himself into this adventure. He really wants to make a go of it. He tries to speak the language. He's quite pleasant in many ways, I think. And the person who's the source of all the sort of misery is his sister, who complains about everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's the basic setup. I think, he decides that that's where they're going to retire to. And she goes with him, but she wants to go, as she says, something like every 5 minutes, that she'd rather go to Bognor and have been in Bognor. And he, at one point, even talks about, why would I want to be in Bognor with all the same kind of people that you always see? And again, it's this kind of, he wants something different. He wants change of scene. But they end up going out there, but it does, I think it's mentioned in one of the episodes that actually he's only been out there once or something and not to the same place before he makes this kind of fairly life-changing decision to put all of the money into it. And they end up in classic Carry On Abroad style. They turn up to their wonderful apartment in a tower block, which is meant to have views of the Mediterranean. And of course, it's not properly finished and you can't really see the Mediterranean because they're building another tower block in front of them. And that's really the setup. And to be honest, the first series doesn't really get beyond that.
Here, go and get a couple of eggs for breakfast for us, will you, love? Go on.
Because the electricity is still off.
Oh, well, it'll soon be on here. Here, look, we brought them from home, look. Best British farmhouse eggs. What's wrong now, then?
I've just realised I shall never see Tesco's again.
The first series is literally every single episode is just complaining about one particular aspect. So there's complaints about the weather, complaints about the food, complaints about the electricity, complaints about the water, complaints about the shops, the plumbing. And it's just a whole series, 7 episodes of just misery.
It's like they're dead and in hell.
Yes.
It's literally the same every episode. And what has really got me when I watched this again, because I have seen it before, was that the first series, 7 episodes, is set over 6 days. It's like real time.
They get browner as the episodes go on as well. They actually do make quite a big effort to show the change. Blakey's always showing his white bits, for example.
Yes.
And Pat Coombs has always got a nice sheen of sweat all over, which is a sentence I never thought I'd ever say. But they do go to extreme efforts to make it quite realistic. But it is literally like being trapped in a prison cell almost.
Yeah, and they go on and about things which get quite weird after a while. Like they're obsessed with the fact that Spanish plumbing doesn't have a U-bend. You get this kind of terrible slapstick. At one point, Blakey goes in to have a shower. Derek Griffith, who we'll get on to, who plays the janitor, an all-round handyman, is trying to unblock the pipes and ends up sticking a giant metal spike through the bathroom plug into Blakey's backside. It's that kind of thing.
There's quite a lot of bathroom humour in it, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a relentless focus on the toilet. And, if you flush the toilet, make sure you put a plug in the bath. That kind of thing. It's all interconnected. And the food, I mean, you're right to say that there's constant complaints. Sometimes it's about the food, but it's like there's 2 episodes basically about food and how terrible the food is. The setup is that Derek Griffiths, who plays Carlos, the sort of handyman and janitor.
You heard us right. Derek Griffiths plays the Spanish caretaker. It's incredible.
It is incredible. He has got a terrifying mother-in-law in the classic of the era, who just shouts at everyone all the time in Spanish. And he's got a not quite as often seen wife as well, who Carlos really hates, because he kind of looks at her with loathing whenever she's in the room. It's this kind of slightly disturbing thing. And basically, Carlos is constantly ripping off the two main characters.
Yeah.
They send him out for some food because the supermarket, which they're expecting to have on their doorstep, hasn't been built yet. So they send Carlos out to get them some food. And of course, Carlos buys lots of stuff that he wants because he knows that they'll give it away, give it back to him. And it really did take me back to that kind of time, is that every time Pat Coombs encounters someone Spanish, she says something along the lines of, "Oh, the garlic. Oh, the garlic smell." And basically, she sniffs the salami that he brings and doesn't want it. Yes, I did say Pat Coombs sniffs the salami. We're getting some weird sentences today. But then the other really disturbing thing is he brings out an octopus.
A live one.
Yeah, well, yes, because they're going on about Spanish people like really fresh food. And I actually found it genuinely disturbing, the octopus, because it's presumably not a real octopus. But then the bit where they put it down, Derek Griffiths puts it down on the table, and they do some kind of video effect on it to make it look like it's crawling towards them. And it's like kind of Terror of the Autons or something like that, isn't it? A Doctor Who kind of thing, with a kind of CSO effect on it. But then in another episode, they end up eating lots of sheep eyes as well. And it's a bit, kind of Cronenbergish, Lovecraftian. Yeah. Certainly the octopus is.
But again, what surprised me about it is that Blakey was well up for it. He tried everything.
Yeah, that's it. He does. And, it's sort of like he knows that he probably doesn't like it, but he's saying he wants to get used to it, doesn't he? And to be fair, when the mother-in-law brings the paella, it is the most disgusting looking paella I've ever seen. It still managed to give me, the dry boke a little bit there, because it was just the paella's got all this oil.
Oh, it's horrific.
It is really horrific. But as you say, Blakey, he goes for it. He tries it, doesn't he?
He really does.
Go on, you eat it. Or have you lost your appetite?
Of course not. I'll have just a little bit to start with, please.
Si, senor.
That's enough. That's enough. Don't mate. What's that? Yeah, a bit of fish there, look.
Oh.
Not bad. You fish all right?
You don't like it, do you?
There's nothing wrong with it. It's all right. Very tasty, that is. It's fish, yeah. Chewy. A bit chewy. A bit rubbery, but...
Rubber? That must be the octopus.
Even Pat Coombs towards the end is like making an effort to speak the language.
She is, and she also is very susceptible to flattery, isn't she? Because there's a bit of a vibe between her and Derek Griffiths. Again, not something you'd expect. Oh, there is. There definitely is. Because at one point, Blakey keeps getting into a repetitive thing where when they start sort of complimenting each other, Blakey's just immediately going, "Oh, leave it out. Leave that out." And the other thing we should mention is the Pat Coombs character, Dottie, is dosed up on nerve pills. And at one point she says she brought out 3 months worth of nerve pills and she's had them all in a week, which you'd think would have killed her, apart from anything else. I mean, it's so she's off her head on nerve pills, and Blakey's just trying to make the best of it, isn't he, really? He knows it's gone wrong a bit with the flat and everything, but he's determined to make the best of it and to enjoy his retirement. And he mentions a few times being free of the bus depot.
He has a new catchphrase, doesn't he, as well? What's his catchphrase, John?
His catchphrase is, "Don't drive me mad.
Don't make me mad.
Don't drive." So he never quite takes off like, "I hate you, Butler," does it? It doesn't quite work. But it's claustrophobic program, deeply claustrophobic. Aside from a few location shots, which hilariously are sort of shots of building works in Spain, kind of with a slate grey sky. It's very oppressive. There's an English couple who are a sexed up English couple who live next door, basically, that kind of come back and forth and just generally get on everyone's nerves. But really, it's about Derek Griffiths, Pat Coombs, and Blakey.
I believe the original plan was to have it more of an ensemble piece, wasn't it? That it was supposed to be lots of expats living in this apartment.
Yeah, the untransmitted pilot, which they started with, does have a bigger cast. And it actually has a few quite well-known people in it. So one of the characters, the equivalent of the sexed-up English couple, the bloke is played by Glyn Edwards, Dave the barman in Minder. Aubrey Morris plays a gay guy who fancies Blakey. And Pat Coombs' character Dottie fancies him. So they were obviously setting that up. That's interesting, the untransmitted pilot, because firstly, they did go out and film quite a bit on location. And that is incorporated in there. And I'm guessing the stuff that ended up in the series proper was cannibalised from what they filmed for the untransmitted pilot. But the vibe in the untransmitted pilot towards the end is definitely they're setting up an ensemble. And also that it's a bit like... There's a drama series on the BBC called The Lotus Eaters set in Crete, where it has a group of expats and each episode sort of focuses on one of the characters or one of the couples. Again, like I'm saying, it's sort of like hell, because at the end of the untransmitted pilot, you realise that the only thing that these people have got to do is to go to the nearby cafe and start drinking as early as possible. Because there's literally nothing else to do.
Yeah, they're all alcoholics, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And even Blakey towards the end of the untransmitted pilot, because the other thing about Blakey is he's supposed to be pretty much teetotal, but he starts having a drink as well. Now, why they changed that, I suspect there could be a couple of reasons. I think there might be economic reasons for it, because it's obviously cost more money to have more well-known actors and a bigger cast. But also the whole economy was starting to crash around 1974 as well, because this went out in 74 and 75. And the untransmitted pilot was made sort of, I don't know, September 73 or something like that. So I think quite a lot of things have changed in the meantime. So but it is interesting to see what the original plan was.
And Carlos is played by Nadim Swahala, which is Julia Sawala's dad.
Absolutely. And he's very low-key in it. Very low-key. And you can see that Derek Griffiths, who, wonderful, multi-talented man, and he's very energetic as Carlos, but it is extremely broad.
He's quite off-putting, actually, because the trousers he wears are so tight. There's one scene where I literally spent staring at his penis. It was worse than the octopus.
That is how I learned my English. 6 months at the Soho Hotel. I learned many things about British habits. I was the night porter. Screams of delight.
It's all right, not in front of my sister, if you don't mind.
Dile lo que le hicieron a las inglesas.
Oh, sí. Last night, hundreds of holiday girls who were thrown out of their rooms, English ones, they had to sleep around.
Yeah, there's a lot of them doing that without being thrown out of their hotel rooms. Come on, let's get down that cab.
But what I love about his character is that when you first meet him, you think, oh, this is just going to be really racist. It's going to be really bad. But he gets the upper hand virtually in every episode, doesn't he?
Yeah, I suppose you could say that one of the things, though, it's kind of perpetuating is the idea that all the Spanish people that you meet will be trying to rip off the English. Yeah. Because he does it literally all the time, doesn't he? It's like...
All the police are corrupt as well, aren't they?
That's the other thing that's interesting about this, of course, is that Franco was still in charge of Spain at this point. And so therefore it was, the land of institutionalised fascism. And I always find that quite interesting that people used to go on their package holidays in a fascist state. And... that's a threat quite often, isn't it, in this programme? Because you have the cops walking around with machine guns, basically. So when Blakey's going, I've got a list of complaints.
They think he's a terrorist, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. They think he's a terrorist. He does get accused of being a terrorist in one episode, doesn't he? So there's that weird backdrop of threat. I mean, I think Franco died during the second series of Don't Drink the Water. Not that it was related, I don't think, but...
Weren't you telling me at one point, John, that they were going to film this in Spain? Like the whole thing?
Well, there's a London Evening News article which basically says that it was just before they started filming the untransmitted pilot, and the article says that they're going to go out, they're going to shoot in Spain, and their intention is they're going to carry on shooting in Spain if they make a series, because it's so cheap, relatively cheap, and also because it's so sunny.
Wow.
You got guaranteed filming days, but as I say, that went by the wayside, and we end up with the classic studio-bound, largely studio-bound anyway. I think the second series is pretty much entirely studio-bound, and it's just claustrophobic, and again, you get the idea that these are two people in some kind of private hell.
So I'm guessing it was quite popular then to get a second series.
It's a good question, because it definitely got a second series. Looking at the recording numbers from the LWT, the sort of internal numbers, it was definitely filmed as 2 blocks, because sometimes you get things where they may film like 13 episodes, because it was quite common for series to be done in 13 episode blocks of series, because it was like a quarter of a year. And so things like Police Doctor in the House and stuff, you used to typically get for a series of 13 episodes in length. But in this case, they clearly were filmed as 2 blocks, so it clearly wasn't just we've got these 13 episodes and we have to get them out, we'll put them out as 2 series. They were filmed separately. So they must have had a feeling that they were at least going to get some. The other thing is, of course, it was scheduled in the summer. And basically, that's normally not a good sign. Certainly in those days, it was a real dead time to show things in the summer. So maybe they thought it was worth giving it another spin. And to be fair, the second series, some of the episodes actually feel like an actual sitcom with a story.
Yeah, they break away from that claustrophobia and open it up a bit, don't they?
Yeah.
I prefer the second season a lot. Again, I don't know if it's because I just become used to the characters. My favourite episode is probably, I think it's the second episode of season 2, which revolves around Spanish television, where Carlos manages to convince Dottie to get a TV, and she's desperate to watch Upstairs, Downstairs, and there's this whole subplot revolving around translating Upstairs, Downstairs, and it really made me laugh.
Well, at that time, I seem to remember that whenever a programme showed a clip of an English programme with a dubbed foreign language on it, and I think, I don't know whether it was It'll Be Alright on the Night or programs like that. Mm-hmm. If they ever showed it, the studio audience would die laughing. It was just the thought of an English person opening their mouth and a foreign voice coming out was just like the end, living end. It was like there couldn't be anything funnier than it.
Well, they're all talking Spanish. What are they talking Spanish for?
Because it's shown out in Spain, I suppose.
Well, it's not the same. It spoils it.
Ciego si no lo nota. Oh, muy viejo.
¿Quién eres tú para decirme eso, Rosa? No importa el tiempo que haya estado en el servicio aquí.
Mr. Hudson doesn't sound like himself at all.
Well, it can't be easy to speak Spanish with a Scottish accent, can it?
There are kind of situations, aren't there, in the second series? So you introduce comedy Germans at one point.
Well, again, that surprised me. I was expecting it to be like Fawlty Towers and, but again, Blakey really makes an effort to get on with them.
There's the old war joke.
There's a bit of rivalry, but they're really accommodating, they're really friendly, and they're really welcoming.
Yeah, this'll make you laugh. They used to call me Hitler.
Yeah! That is so! Look, Willy, does he not look like Adolf?
Yeah, come, please to stand, and raise the hand, so that
And another running theme that goes through the programme I've noticed is that although they're obviously complaining a lot about Spain, Britain is even worse. There's an episode where a woman pretends to fall in love with Blakey just so she doesn't have to go back to England. That's how bad England is.
Well, it's the 3-day week, isn't it? And it's that kind of industrial strife and so on. And that is that's the reason that you might want to get out. And as you say, that again, it's not particularly brilliant or anything, but the episode called Fred, where Blakey makes up the fact that he's got a friend called Fred, and actually it's this woman who's a total kind of gold digger, and just abandons Blakey at the end. But that again, it's a sitcom plot, isn't it? It's and then obviously Pat Coombs gets jealous, thinks she's going to get dumped. It's definitely an improvement, but not enough to save it, I think.
The series ends in an interesting way as well, doesn't it? With their grisly deaths under a table.
With the Germans. There's a terrible sort of portent of doom at the start of the last episode where they mention that there's been an earthquake in another part of Spain and the entire tower block has come down. And you don't say there's lots of fatalities, but that's the implication. And then the confusion arises because it's so shoddily built, their building, that the Germans are keen on doing physical exercise on the balcony. They're quite big. So they make such a kind of like incredible racket and cause such vibration that Blakey and Dottie think there's an earthquake, as does Derek Griffiths, and they hide under the table because that's the safest place to be. And then, of course, the twist, a big twist, folks, that comes at the end is they think it's the Germans again. There's a terrible rumbling. Then suddenly the Germans run in and they're terrified because it's not them. It's an earthquake. And that's the last thing you see of Blakey is saying,
We might well have been better off in Bognor.
And then they all die.
So there were no plans for a third series?
I think, no. I've not. Well, there was a number of things that happened at LWT then that I think not put paid to making popular comedies, but I think put paid. I think they had it was almost like they had what's the word, an intervention with each other at LWT, because there was a conference at Selsdon, I think it was. Yeah, the LWT Selsdon conference. It was because a guy called Brian Tesler, amazing broadcaster, came along, and he worked at Thames before, but then he got poached by LWT and became deputy sort of managing director. Mm-hmm. And he decided to get all of the execs together. And basically they had this sort of weird kind of session where they were just basically admitting that things had got into a bit of a rut at LWT. And Cyril Bennett said to it was almost like confessional. He was basically saying to everyone that he'd taken some soft options recently in terms of programming for entertainment. And I suspect Don't Drink the Water was very much one of those, because it was just a sequel. What softer option can you possibly get to that? And Michael Grade also, because he was head of light entertainment, and he said he'd made some terrible mistakes with sitcoms like Romany Jones and Yes, My Dear. And he said in his autobiography that there was nothing much I could do in my response at Selsdon other than plead guilty but insane. So it was a weird event, but everybody, the execs at LWT felt energised by this. And Cyril Bennett, director of programmes, said goodbye to Tesla, went back to his apartment and fell from his 6th floor apartment and died that night.
Now, was it on purpose or an accident?
There was a real assumption that it was suicide.
Must have been a bad meeting.
Well, you see, the thing is, that's exactly what the press said. The press characterised it that Bennett, it was a 3-day session where everybody was slagging off Bennett, the director of programmes, and he went home and killed himself. Apparently there was a recording of the whole thing, an audio recording of the whole thing, and the tone is not like that at all. Now, Michael Grade and others like John Burt thought initially that that Cyril Bennett was really disconsolate afterwards, but there were things going on in Bennett's private life as well. And so what I'm not saying here, and I don't think we can sustain, is that Don't Drink the Water killed Cyril Bennett. I don't think it's that cut and dried. But it's after that, I think, there was a sort of, it was almost like they woke up out of a weird reverie and thought, why have we been making these programmes? Because apparently lots of people at LWT were just embarrassed by these sitcoms. And of course, the irony was that LWT had all these highfalutin ideas about what you would do to do public service broadcasting, and they ended up with the reputation of making the cheapest, the kind of like lousiest, lowest common denominator sitcoms. And eventually Cyril Bennett, who was director of programmes and had died, he was replaced. Brian Tesler appointed Michael Grade to replace him. Mm-hmm. And he was asked later, why did you appoint Grade? Because he wasn't that experienced and he was quite young, and he said, it was because I needed to remove him from the role of LWT's head of light entertainment, in which, in series like Romany Jones and Yes, My Dear, he seemed dedicated to try and make an international comedy star of Arthur Mullard. And apparently Tesler, to this day, doesn't quite know. He doesn't know whether Michael Grade thinks he was joking or not about that. It was just like, get this man away from Director of Light Entertainment immediately. Things changed quite radically after that, and it's almost like Don't Drink the Water was a final splutter, or near final, because Yes, My Dear came afterwards. But we'll get on to Yes, My Dear another time.
Of course. Now, John, where can people watch Don't Drink the Water if they feel compelled to do so?
Well, it is currently on Rewind TV, right, which is in various places on the Sky EPG. Is it on Freeview? I can't remember. I'll put the details in the... in the blog. I can't remember off the top of my head where it is, but it is on now. Normally when they do these things, they repeat it kind of like 2 or 3 times. So it's currently near the end of series 2, but I'm sure
it'll go again.
It'll go again. And also you can pick up the old network DVD should you feel compelled to.
Would you recommend it, John?
Now that is a difficult question. In all honesty, I think if you're interested in the evolution of sitcom, and particularly of that era and why certain programmes were made. Bearing in mind as well that some of the episodes made it into the top 20. They were still popular. Loads and loads of people would have watched them. I think the highest rated one was the last episode of series 1, which was called The Stink, or The Smell. The Smell. And one of the reasons I watch these programmes really is that I as I've probably expressed, I find it a fascinating era to see that, the reasons that why these things exist. It might surprise you a little bit if you watch it for the reasons we've outlined as well, is that you'd expect it to be the kind of much more particularly Blakey, as you say, he's not a kind of, and this is what goes back to what I was saying about on the buses. Blakey is the redeemable, he's got redeemable features. He wants to branch out. He's open to women driving the buses. He tries to encourage it. He's open to foreign lands. He wants to get away from the kind of narrow, blinkered British view. And so that's a surprising element of it. But to be fair, you have to get through series 1. And series 1 is a dispiriting experience.
Do you think we shall ever see England again?
You can have your blooming England, mate, and your bingo halls, and your fish and chips.
Well, I'm proud of being English, and what's more, I like bingo and fish and chips. I miss all them nice English things like Huey Green.
Now, we asked some of our listeners what they thought of Don't Drink the Water. We've got a few responses. We'll start with John Rain. He said it's like watching a documentary about a horrible exhumation and seeing inside the coffin as it lays on the morgue table.
We've got Stephen Forkus says, appears to have been written by someone who has never been abroad and is terrified of the place.
Chris Orton says Stephen Lewis has a vast range. He can play Blakey in a bus depot, Blakey in Spain, and Blakey in Last of the Summer Wine.
John Rivers has an interesting point. He retains that slightly odd sitcom setup of the 60s, 70s where middle-aged siblings live together, nearest and dearest, on the buses, and the best one, Sykes. All the bickering you'd get from a married couple, but none of the soppiness.
Last word, Phil Norman. He says, casting Derek Griffiths in this is like using a royal sceptre to unblock a toilet.
And there's a lot of toilet unblocking in this programme.
Well, in the words of Pat Coombs, grassy arse. So join us next time where John and I will take another trip through the TV archives. And until then, I've been Neil.
And I've been John.
And you've been listening to The World of Telly.
Goodbye from the world of Telly.
Don't drive me mad.